All right, can everybody see my screen? Great. Hi, I'm Christina Bellatoni. I am the director of the Media Center and a longtime journalist who came to Annenberg to teach journalism about 2 years ago. And I've covered a million events and wanted to do this workshop just to give students some pointers on best practices. So we're going to go through actual events stories that have been published by Annenberg Media and how they can be better. Effectively, how to get beyond this event happened. That is the most common sort of mistake that we see, and you'll see in a second. It's not actually a mistake, you don't have something wrong, but it's less interesting. So we're going to start here with a story. This is the lead from a story about John Leguizamo, the actor, and how he came to campus. He did this event. Gosh, I miss events at the Forum. They will be back, I promise. Latinx comedian John Leguizamo and theatrical director Tony Tacone participated in a Q&A session in the Wallace Annenberg Hall Forum on Wednesday. So this lead is fine. We have a second sentence. It's presented in conjunction with all these people, and here's all the people that were there. It's not wrong. All of those things are true and accurate. But it's boring, right? You have the who, what, when, and where. Can any of you chime in? What is it missing?
The why.
The why, and also the news. The news, right? Surely in this 1 hour discussion, there was something interesting that was said. So here are some things that are in the bottom of this story, which again got published on Annenberg Media, telling us a little bit more about Leguizamo, what he's known for, his show that's coming up, talks about his son a little bit. So just give you a second to absorb the rest of this story, which I found very interesting when I read it. But we do know that from looking at metrics, people are drawn in by a headline, and they usually don't read past the first 50, 75, 100 words. And so if you don't really grab them in those first 50, 75, 100 words, they're not going to read the rest of your story, and you want them to. So we're going to take the same text, and I've got some bolding on here. Okay, so what's interesting in this? First of all, he's got a one-man show. It ran on Broadway and it was on Netflix. So that's something, definitely of interest to a young adult audience, where, you guys watch a lot of Netflix. It's also at this theater in LA, at the time that this event happened. So that's the why, like why we would invite this actor to campus at all and why his perspective is interesting. But then here, his son was bullied and racially profiled in school. So he turned to theater to supply his son with examples of Latin heroes to look up to and use as a source of strength. That's so interesting to me, right? That is new. That is something people can identify with. Something, bullying is a constant topic among, high school and college students, faculty. It's, national news sometimes, right? And then here, while doing his research on Latin history to give his son a sense of meaning behind his culture, Leguizamo realized how much of it he never learned himself. That's really interesting. And then here's this great quote. So all of those things I want at the top of a story. Any questions before I show you how I would do this? Okay. So, and then there's the second sentence here, right? With all these names. Again, it's accurate, but it's really not necessary. John Wang is not quoted in this story, and it really just takes up words that get away from the news. This happens frequently to me. There will be an event and it'll say, 5 political pundits gathered to discuss the debate Tuesday. Okay, accurate, that did happen. And then the second sentence will say, it was moderated by Annenberg journalism professor Christina Bellatoni, who was a journalist for 20 years, most recently at the LA Times, covering politics. That's also fine, but I don't need my name up there. And the average reader doesn't care who I am or that I was the person moderating. Like, if a moderator does a good job, you don't even know who the moderator is. What you want is the news, what was said, right? So let's try again. This is how I would rewrite this story. When John Leguizamo's son was bullied and racially profiled at school, the actor and comedian turned to theater to try and give his son examples of Latin heroes to look up to and use as a source of strength. That was the inspiration for his one-man show, which started on Broadway, is now at the Amundsen Theater. Now that's again, exact information out of the story. The reporter had this, wrote it in basically these same words, but a lead like this draws you in. You know, first of all, if you don't know who John Leguizamo is in the first 10 words, then you see, oh, actor and comedian, right? And you also like, it helps you identify with him, makes you sort of draws you in as this interesting person and what he's after. You know, and then you have this great quote as your lead quote. I strongly recommend this in any story. Have a quote that says something. I wanted my son to beat the bully with facts and information, Leguizamo said at an event Wednesday at USC, right? We don't need to know that this is an event at USC in the very beginning of the story. You know, in some cases that's kind of presumed. You're going to have a photo that will show the person on campus, or, you know, these days in a Zoom room. But what you want is the sort of highlight. You know, here's a pretty famous actor who's been on Broadway, he's been in movies, he's been on television, and he came to USC Wednesday, and that's all fine, right? And then you say he was joined, and then say a little bit more about what happened. You don't need the moderators, you don't need the organizers, you don't need all the people whose logos are on the sign. You know, I've seen stories where it says, you know, the event was sponsored by Microsoft or whatever. Like, none of that is really relevant. But you would say they shared details about the creative process and took questions on everything from blank to blank. So that part wasn't in the story. You want some sort of summation of like, overall, you spent an hour at this event. Like, you don't have to recount it in detail. You're not treating it like you're the stenographer for the event, but you want to give a sense of, you know, was it funny? Were they telling jokes? Was it really serious? Did they talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and were people crying, right? All of those different types of things you can get to. Did they talk about politics and it got heated? You could have that in the top of the story, again, just to kind of give people a sense of what happened. And then he could go on. While doing his research on Latin history to give his son a sense of meaning behind his culture, Leguizamo said he realized how much he never learned himself. And then here's this second great quote, right? So now you've got the first 150 words of this story are interesting, draw you in, potentially might even have national import, right? If the Hollywood Reporter was there, this is how they would write this story. And if the Hollywood Reporter wasn't there, they might see your story on social media and share it on Twitter. Or John Leguizamo might share it on Twitter, right? This is a good, interesting summation of his event. And he's not going to share a story that says John Leguizamo was on campus at USC Wednesday, and here's who moderated the event. Like, it's just, it's a slight tweak in how you think about it. And I frequently recommend just not to write the first sentence, right? Just get everything you can, write all the background, and then take another look at it and decide, you know what, what's the most interesting thing here? And then write your lead. Especially as you're starting out, lead writing is not easy. It takes a while, and it's something that you can develop as you go. Any questions before I move on to the next example? Okay. So here's another one. You guys try it. What is wrong with this story? And we would blank and I would show it to you. But so at the beginning, Kristen Gilger, the author of this book, spoke to students and faculty in Wallace Annenberg Hall Thursday. She connected the stories and lessons in her new book to the issues female journalists face today. It was part of 9 discussions from lead on these dates, right? Veteran reporter held managing editor positions. Anyone want to weigh in? What's wrong with this? There's not really a lot of news in it. Right, so it's a fairly simple fix because you can just add some specifics, right? Tell us that she's a veteran reporter at first, right? That's just more helpful. And you do have the date element on Thursday. Connected the stories and lessons from her new book to the blankety blank issues that journalists face today. You need some specifics there. It's really important because actually, we don't know. If you just come to the story, maybe you're not a female journalist. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't know what the female journalist experience is. Maybe you're a student who's considering journalism, right? All those people are part of the Annenberg Media audience. So say, you know, what is it? Is it sexism? Is it classism? There's all kinds of different types of issues that journalists face today. So you could list those in the lead. And you could say, speaking during one of the 9 presentations. She recounted tales in the book from top journalists, and then you would name drop some of them here, right? Now, I was the moderator of this particular event, and actually, like, it was pretty boring. And a lot of the examples in the book are people that you guys wouldn't necessarily know as a young adult audience, but there are a handful. So I would pick the young people in the book, each one's divided by chapter, and just say, you know, this person and this person, you know, or Judy Woodruff, people might know. She is one of the PBS NewsHour anchors, but, you know, not necessarily a television audience that young adults pay attention to. And then she gave them a pep talk about women in journalism. That was the vibe in the room. It was actually very intimate. There were only about 7 of us there, and people were like pretty like excited. And she was talking about what it's like to be a woman and all the traits that females bring to the profession. So that's what I would want, right, from this actual event. And then you would have a good, strong quote, and then you could list her long resume. The way it was written previously, I think I can go back. You know, it's just, you get a lot of resume, you get the dates, you don't get a lot of why this was interesting. And then suddenly you get a little bit more detail, a little bit more specifics, and then you know what she brings to the table. So here's another example of good events coverage, right? Again, Wallace Annenberg Hall's atrium, which you don't have to have that in the lead, but you get the sense, you feel like you're at the event. It was a packed house. Kennedy joined this professor for a wide-ranging conversation that covered everything from his personal politics to his forecast for 2020, right? You know, Strum began by asking about Kennedy's personal experiences serving in the Peace Corps, and then he has this good quote, right? Now, it's good, but it can still be improved. So, first of all, you could speed it up. In a wide range of conversation, put the most interesting thing at the beginning of your sentence that covered everything from his personal politics to his forecast for the 2020 presidential election. Kennedy had the packed house, the atrium, hanging on every word, right? That could be good. You're describing the crowd, and that's in the story later. He opened up about serving in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic. You don't need Shrum in there at all. It doesn't matter what Shrum asked. You could say later, he told Shrum. But, you know, the bigger issue is that it's about what this person shared. You have a top member of Congress, someone who was very prominent at the time. He packed the house. So what did he share? And that's interesting, right? All right. So now, how do you pick the most newsy thing? I always tell people, start with what interests you. You know, you're at an event, you might tune out for a second, you might not necessarily catch everything, you might not be as familiar with the topic. I mean, certainly if you get an assignment, you're sent to an event for something you didn't choose, you might not be as interested. So what do your ears perk up at? Is there tension? You know, we sent a student to cover a big political conference, and at one point there was a huge fight between a very conservative person and a liberal person that got really heated. Like, people had to tell them to tone it down. It was very intense, right in Town and Gown. And that wasn't in the story, right? So we had to like kind of go back and dig that out. Like, that should be the lead of the story, really. You know, a panel that was supposed to be about bipartisan politics and finding solutions devolved into a shouting match between a professor and a conservative journalist, you know, on Friday at USC. Like, that's interesting, right? You kind of want to keep reading more. What was the fight about, etc. So what if your tape recorder fails? You don't have full quotes. First of all, you should always be taking notes. You know, you don't want to rely entirely on your recorder. I think you listen better when you know you have your recorder on and you just kind of like perk up, but you want to make sure you're jotting down like when it happened. So first of all, you might be able to turn to your neighbor and say, hey, did you have a recording of that? Or is there a video? There's lots of things you can do to ask for that. But if you don't, your notes will have to fill in and you're going to have to paraphrase. So in the John Leguizamo account, like, you might have to write that whole story without an actual quote. Maybe you only remember one phrase he said. Well, that's where you're going to paraphrase that phrase. It's a problem, but, you know, asking around for help is always good. Checking on social media. Some people might have tweeted video about it, put something on Instagram that could help. All right, then another question. What if the event is boring? That also happens. You've got an assignment and you need to turn in a story, so you have to find something. And it might not be the most titillating thing ever, so don't spend a ton of time trying to figure it out. Think about what got the loudest laugh, what got the largest applause. Ask somebody in the audience, what did you find to be the most interesting thing about this event? And whatever they say, chances are someone else found that interesting, even if you didn't. So that's a good way to do it. So then I get this all the time. I thought I was supposed to go in chronological order. We get stories filed all the time that say, you know, when opening the discussion, the dean thanked the, you know, tech staff and, you know, the public relations staff for putting the event together and asked first about how the person was doing in a pandemic, right? Instead of usually the news of an event is in the middle, almost always, right? People warm up, they get more comfortable, they start talking, and you might have to just kind of be patient and listen. And you don't have to tell us everything that happened. You, again, are not a stenographer. You're not reciting every fact. You know, you are basically giving me the highlight because I wasn't able to attend the event. Or maybe your article will get me to go try to find a video of the event so I can see it in full because there was an exciting, interesting point at some point. So I hope that all makes sense. And then, you know, the question is, do I need to include the details on location and time? The event already happened, so it doesn't matter. You don't need to tell people it was at noon unless somebody tripped with their lunch everywhere and that's in your story, right? Like where it's relevant, you could make that up. You could say, you know, an evening forum where people, you know, came in out of the snow or whatever, right? There are things that might necessitate those details, but usually just the day is fine, you know. So-and-so said Thursday on campus, and that's your second, third, fourth sentence, right? The news is at the top. Maybe you have the quote, and then you can say, you know, Pete Buttigieg said in a forum in the in Bovard on Thursday, right? That happened in February. Or a group of alumni said in a wide-ranging discussion organized by an Annenberg professor Monday night. That's kind of it. You know, you can say it was Zoom, right? That is relevant if it's an in-person event or not, but you don't really need to go into the who, what, when, and where of like the actual event. You want to think about the person, why he or she is newsworthy, and then what they bring to the table. Are there any questions? All right, that is the end of the presentation. So it's pretty easy. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop our recording.